Chapter 19. Control. Fu Jingzhou didn't move, but the hand holding her wrist gradually tightened. Xiao Ci, did you forget? You just signed a contract with Hualin Hospital. For the next 3 years, you can't go anywhere. I've arranged everything abroad. Your mentor, even your senior, they can't help you. Xiao Ci, now you can only stay by my side. Wan Ci gritted her teeth and looked at him, her gaze growing colder. Fu Jingzhou, do you really think you can have absolute control now? He had the upper hand, and his fingers affectionately stroked her cheek, from her cheek, moving upward. His touch reached her stunning yet indifferent and resentful eyes. Xiao Ci, you can try. You can't leave the country now, and in Xiangcheng, no one dares to help you. He lowered his head slowly, his voice turning gentle. Xiao Ci, we only have each other left. We should be together forever, torturing each other. He watched her lower her eyes, a look of powerlessness, and although it pained him, he felt an indescribable pleasure. He could finally have complete control over her. For the past few years, her radiance had grown brighter, and she had more and more admirers and suitors. He was in China, while she was abroad, even though he had people surveilling her daily. Because he couldn't see her in person, he was still afraid. Afraid he would never be able to grasp her again. Afraid she would forever leave him. But now, it was different. She was finally his. Xiao Ci, he kissed her earlobe, his tone sickly yet infatuated. Be good and stay by my side. All the honors you have now are still yours. He held her tightly. Your father won't carry any stain on his name after his death. He will still be the highly respected top scholar, but his voice paused for a moment. He looked at her cold, turned away eyes and continued. Xiao Ci, if you don't behave, I will reveal your father's murders to everyone. Then, not only you, even your parents' lifetime of glory will be destroyed in an instant, hearing his words. Wan Ci suddenly laughed, but her laughter was full of desolation and extreme disappointment. Fu Jingzhou, how did you suppress such deep-seated hatred and deceive me as if nothing had happened for 8 years? Fu Jingzhou remained silent, but his lips gradually moved downward, as if seeking her lips. In that instant, a scene flashed in Wan Ci's mind. Fu Jingzhou and Su Ruth in the Su family mansion. She felt an inexplicable surge of nausea. She instinctively resisted, forcefully turning her head away. And from her crimson lips came a few words. Don't touch me. You're filthy. The last word was like a nail piercing straight into Fu Jingzhou's heart. Almost instantly, veins bulged on his forehead. His eyes turned dark and fierce. Filthy, he repeated coldly. In the next moment, without any warning, he lifted her up, suppressing the scream building in her throat. Wan Ci struggled to break free from his grip. But how could her strength compare to Fu Jingzhou's? In just 2 or 3 seconds, he threw her onto the bed with force. His tall body followed, pressing down on her. His actions were rough, and the furious Fu Jingzhou didn't care if it hurt her or not. In his eyes and heart, this was his pent-up rage from her repeated attempts to leave. He pinned her hands above her head, pressing his body onto hers. His other hand began tearing at her clothes. Filthy, huh? His thin lips lifted slightly. The words he uttered icy cold. Wan Ci, I've pampered you for so many years. Shouldn't you repay me now? He pressed his body down further, nearly half of his weight pressing onto her. Since you find it filthy, all right, then let's be filthy together. Finishing his words, he bit down on her lips, silencing all her angry shouts and curses. But after just a short couple of seconds, he suddenly released her. Fu Jingzhou raised his body. Looking at the young girl beneath him, tears welled up in the corners of her eyes, almost as if they were about to fall like blood. Her cry of despair and suppression finally breaking free. Large teardrops rolled down her cheeks, mingling with her hair. Her arms were held by him, making her unable to struggle. But those delicate, boneless fingers, at this moment, clenched the bedsheet with all their might, the force so strong that her fingertips turned white. Fu Jingzhou couldn't describe the feeling in his heart at this moment. She was his enemy. He should have humiliated her, made her cry, caused her pain, and pushed her into despair. Yet, seeing her tears, He felt as though his heart was tearing apart. In Fu Jingzhou's memory, Wan Ci had always been a strong girl. Even when faced with the sudden death of her parents 8 years ago, she had merely hidden her grief behind her reddened eyes and had never shed a tear in front of anyone else. She never allowed anyone to see her vulnerability. She would rather swallow her pain than let her weaknesses become a subject of mockery. Throughout these 8 years, he had seen her cry only a handful of times. By the time Fu Jingzhou returned to his senses, he had already released her. He stood up, looking at Wan Ci curled up on the bed, silently shedding tears. He should have broken her pride, shattered her beliefs, and turned her into a clinging one that needed to rely on him constantly to survive. But now, he found himself softening. Xiao Ci. He sat on the bed, reaching out to touch her, but she instinctively moved away from him as if he were a plague. Seeing her pressed against the edge of the bed, Fu Jingzhou didn't approach her further. He stood up and took 2 steps back. Xiao Ci, I'll give you 3 days to think it over. After 3 days, whether you're willing or not, I won't stop halfway. After saying this, he turned to leave. Wan Ci suddenly spoke up, her voice hoarse. Let me leave. Fu Jingzhou clenched his fist. Impossible. I don't want to stay here. I want to go back to my own apartment, she insisted. Fu Jingzhou looked back at her deeply, said nothing, and then walked away. Wan Ci heard the sound of the door locking after his footsteps had faded. She hurried to the window and saw that the main door outside was locked as well. Fu Jingzhou left Starbei, leaving the entire villa to Wan Ci. She hugged herself and slowly squatted on the ground, feeling a kind of coldness she had never experienced before. Crystal tears fell, one by one, onto the carpet, quickly absorbed by the carpet. They left behind only a dampness, proof that they had existed. Throughout the night, Wan Ci considered many different options, but none of them seemed viable. Fu Jingzhou's power had grown too great. As he had said, in the entirety of Xiangcheng, there was no one who dared to oppose him until the next morning. When she checked her phone's notifications, she saw a tabloid gossip article. Normally, she would just swipe past such notifications without clicking on them. However, this time, when she saw the words heir of the Liu family in the headline, Wan Ci's eyes flickered. In terms of power and status, the only person who could rival Fu Jingzhou was the heir of the Liu family, Liu Yu. Wan Ci absent-mindedly rubbed the back of her phone, contemplating the feasibility of this situation. Early the next morning, the lock on her door was unlocked, and the housekeeper brought in her breakfast. But it wasn't until the 3rd day that the lock outside Starbei was finally opened. This was because, according to the contract, Wan Ci needed to complete her registration procedure at Hualin Hospital on the 3rd day. Perhaps because the registration process wasn't completed, Fu Jingzhou didn't take away her documents on the 3rd day, holding her identification. Wan Ci scheduled a meeting with Liu Yu through Le Sheng Group's appointment system, all the way to the coffee shop. Wan Ci had no assurance whatsoever. People like Liu Yu, who were wealthy, powerful, and yet detached from the human world, tended to be cold and heartless, regardless of success or failure. This was her only chance. No matter what, she had to take a gamble. However, Wan Ci hadn't expected that Liu Yu would so readily agree to meet her.